So where we sit as Guides for Brides is right in the middle of venues, couples and suppliers, and it does give us a really good insight into everything that's going on, and where needed we intervene. If we notice that there's a particular issue going on, as we have this week, or a particular concern, it gives us the opportunity to intervene, to speak to venues, to speak to suppliers, and then later on this evening I'll be speaking to couples and just helping to manage that process so that it is a wedding business centric approach they're getting, rather than reading in the newspaper or reading on a sort of slightly anti-wedding forum what they could or should be doing. Sorry, let's just jump back there. So the data that we've been looking at, this has come from the first 2 weeks of this year. So it was a survey that went out on on New Year's Eve. And we had 6,200 couples responded. Typically, they're from right the way across the UK. There are more in England than the rest of the UK, but that is just because that is where the majority of the weddings are. If anyone is joining from any of the devolved nations, we have got data very specifically for each one, because we're working with them as well on their solutions. Most people are still planning both their ceremony and their reception. There are a few couples that are just planning their reception. You can see there is a slight imbalance here in the number. Those couples that went ahead with very small weddings, and obviously the message we were giving to them was, have your legal wedding now, but have the reception later. We don't want suppliers being cut out of this equation. The timelines that people were responding from, obviously this doesn't indicate how many weddings will happen throughout the year. This is when the respondents' weddings were taking place. And the reason there's so many April, May, June, July, these are the ones that know they've got everything to play for and we're really wanting to get their input across. These are the ones that are expecting the impact to be felt on their wedding. There's actually more weddings tend to take place in September than any other time. So you can see by then, these couples aren't concerned. And I think this is something that venues would echo. They're not hearing from those couples from September onwards. And what we know from these couples is quite a lot of them, amazingly, this is their first attempt at getting married. So remember, the lead-in time for weddings are typically 18 months. So a lot of these people were booking before COVID hit. So all of that drama we had last summer and these expectations, yes, they've had longer to prepare, but they're still going to be going through this for the first time. Those that have postponed once, a large number of those sitting in that red sector postponed from the same time of year last year. So these are our April, May weddings last year. Their hearts have been broken once already. Some of them postponed because they then felt by waiting a year they could have exactly the wedding they wanted. They've got quite high hopes. Those that have postponed twice seem to be quite relaxed about then postponing more. We're certainly almost seeing it as a badge of honor on Facebook, people saying, I've now postponed 3 times. The ones in this little segment are worth watching out for. Those postponing 4 or more times, we are seeing now are getting to the point of going, I've had it, I can't do this again. So these ones are sadly leading to cancellations, and certainly overall we are seeing more cancellations this year than we were last year. Original number of guests invited, where this is relevant to you as suppliers, obviously for venues, this is really, really important. This is, basically their profit margin starts at about 70 guests. So their profit margin is from the turquoise and orange upwards. So you can see why they have really been hurting with these small weddings, and why so many venues really oppose the idea of weddings for 30 people. It wasn't just that it was excluding suppliers, it just doesn't work for the wedding economy generally. We have some really useful data on the value of each of the guests that will be missing from weddings if they start with lower numbers. That information isn't going to be shared with Treasury yet. That is the trump card for if they open us with smaller numbers. for them to then see the impact. It's been calculated at £391 per guest. And that's going into, it doesn't particularly affect the wedding economy, it's going into the retail economy and the visitor economy that have both been high priorities for the Treasury, and they'll be wanting to get that money back again. So that gives them a real incentive to get safe weddings going quickly. Now, the reason we are concerned now is this, it was the answer when we asked couples what numbers they would be prepared to go ahead with. Now, we have scaled this according to the average number of weddings that took place in each month in 2019. So, and you can see, understandably, those with weddings early on in the year have pretty low expectations anyway. They're not expecting there to be more than 50, but the majority of them are prepared to go ahead with 50 guests. So they are prepared to, typically these, we looked at May as a very, very detailed sample. 84% of couples would go ahead with 50 guests. And that left behind 59 guests from each wedding. So quite a big impact. And the reason that we're expecting that venues may lead us into more postponements, so this will be venue-led, not necessarily couple-led, is that this is the perception from couples on, if guest numbers are reduced, would you expect a different price? And this is for a package or catering plus venue hire. And we would have expected the majority of people to expect a nominal reduction, that they would accept that when the price was calculated for 100 guests, that it was calculated on the basis there were going to be 100 people, and there's that benefit in scale. That's not the expectation of couples. And what was far more worrying for those of you that work in venues that are hire only, 48% of couples expected even hire only venues to halve the cost if they can only have half the number of guests. And if you follow that logic, they are expecting, if there's 15 guests and they paid for 150 guests or hired the venue on the basis that it had capacity for 150, this is their expectation. And the difficulty to add to that is the good old CMA on their September guidance suggested that if the wedding can go ahead for the substantial majority, but some elements can't be provided. So you think of that from the point of view of suppliers, if there are certain things that you're prevented from doing, that it may entitle the consumer to bring a claim for damages, and that to avoid that we need a pro rata price reduction. So, you know, when you start looking at that, you know, does this mean that for the photographer, where it's usually 2 photographers and for whatever reason it makes sense for it to be 1 photographer, does that mean the whole package is half price? It doesn't make sense, but there is enough of a mismatch there that we need to manage it. How are we managing that? First of all, it is helpful that we have got all of the media platforms together on this, behind the same message. So we're working with Rock My Wedding, Hitched, Confetti, Ocean Media, Bridelux, various, the Wedding Industry Awards. Lots of people out there are getting behind this same message, just to say this doesn't make sense and just to discredit the CMA advice. The difficulty is, if it's you doing it, there's a financial benefit in you doing it. If it's us doing it, it can be our opinion. And it's very difficult for them to prevent us from having an opinion, particularly since, I must add, we have right the way through, we have been talking to the CMA, we've been having meetings with the CMA as Guides for Brides to try and address this and to try and feed in relevant data like this and just say this doesn't work, it doesn't work for the industry. So we will be supporting that in saying this just doesn't make sense, and if this is how it will work, it's not in the interest of venues or suppliers to go ahead with weddings. So we've looked a lot on numbers up until now, but as suppliers, that's probably not your number one. It wasn't a surprise that for couples, when we said what is the most important part of a wedding, the majority was saying minimum of 50 guests. It was a very big surprise to us how important it was that they can walk down the aisle in the normal way, and that's something that we can do something about. If they've got celebrant-led weddings, obviously very easy to be outside, but we're also working with the registrars to make sure that that is possible, either with a change through the Law Commission or just encouraging venues to set the wedding up just as you would with a church wedding, with the couple and their witnesses and the registrars just nipping inside for the critical part. But this second pie chart is the second most important to couples, and the biggest priority there as their second priority was music and dancing being permitted. We also gave them the choice of if they could have 100 guests for a banqueting style wedding or 50 guests and be able to have music and dancing, which would they prefer? And 20% went for the banqueting style. It was a staggering 80% want music and dancing. So again, really, really valuable stats coming from these couples. It can't be disputed by government that this is a really important part of weddings. And one of the things that we are doing through the task force is arguing that while a wedding is not what we would class a minimum viable wedding, we're trying to get a definition. What is a minimum viable wedding? And we feel music and dancing is part of that. And I think couples would support us, and I think all suppliers would support us. That until that happens, that surely the wedding industry cannot be classed as being fully open, and as such should be able to access grants. So the possible options that we're looking at for couples and for venues, and the knock-on effect for you as suppliers. So what the venues will now be looking at, particularly with the early weddings, is as the picture becomes clearer, unless the CMA adjust their advice, do they accept the lower numbers, do they accept the restrictions, and more importantly, what do the tier risks mean? Now, it is worth being aware of the proposal that's been put forward to the government. There is absolutely no indication at all as to whether or not it will be accepted, but this is the proposal that is being put forward by the industry, is that in tiers 3 and 4, that weddings are in exceptional circumstances only. So that is what we class as deathbed weddings. There are a few other exceptions that go into that, but basically it is a non-viable wedding. It won't involve any suppliers at all. And that is probably the most appropriate in levels 3, tiers 3 and 4 in England. Obviously, there is slightly different proposals being put forward across the devolved nations. In tier 1, the proposal is that venues should be able to open to socially distant capacity. And in tier 2, the proposal is that that should be 50% of the social distant capacity. Now, before you get too excited, when we've got an Excel calculator and we can work this out for, if you're needing it for any venues you work in, it's not a huge capacity. It's very similar to the capacity that they'll have on their websites if they do cabaret style. That seems to be the closest that we've noticed on various websites. It's not a very big number, but what goes hand in hand with that, and what you will see as being the public-facing statement on this, is that the ask is that it's for 50 plus from Easter weekend onwards. So that is the number that everyone is aiming for, and you need to think about the service that you supply, whether you are wanting to go ahead with potentially restricted weddings. Is the wedding going ahead for you? Is it still frustrated? Because it was much easier for suppliers when the wedding was 15 guests. It tended to be that the majority of the suppliers were excluded. But for the service that you're supplying, remember, frustration works both ways. And if you choose that you know, if you feel you can justify that the couple will not be able to hold up their side of the contract, then you are within your right to, you know, perfectly reasonably say we cannot go ahead, and work out what that then leads to. If you are going ahead with lower numbers, restrictions, tier risks, and it is against your wishes, it is worth just making sure that you discuss and document what the risks are to you, so that the couple understand. They may not realize that, you know, for example, you know, a florist, a cake company, a huge number of suppliers have done 100% of the work before the wedding day. And if the tier changes from tier 2 to tier 3 2 days before the wedding, who is going to cover those costs? Now, we're not for one moment suggesting that businesses should be profiting from that. You know, it's from a couple's misfortune, and it's going to be a matter of probably you being prepared to put your time in as your risk. But I think there should be an expectation and an understanding from couples that if you are taking that risk of putting your time in, that the very least is that you shouldn't be out of pocket, and the cost of the flowers, or the you know, the ingredients, and the power that went into the making of the cake, and so on, and any staff costs are covered. So for those that are looking at postponing, it is helpful to know that they are much more open-minded than they were this time last year on off-peak dates. Last year, what we were looking at is almost every couple we spoke to, one or the other, suddenly appeared to be a teacher and couldn't possibly be off work during the week, you know. But couples now are quite open to the idea that they are unlikely to have to move to be able to move to a peak date. The 12% in here, almost all of them, obviously, we didn't give them the option of, you know, you would cancel and ask for a full refund. That is what most of them were expecting here. They were getting to that point of saying, do you know what, we would just, if we can't have a date that's acceptable to us, we would cancel and think again. Some of them thinking about overseas and so on. We asked what would help delay a final decision until 4 weeks before the wedding. It's not something we would advocate. Most couples and venues are reckoning that 8 weeks before is enough. Anything closer to that, it tends to lead to the couple feeling sort of boxed in, and that their guests are expecting them to go ahead, and they're perhaps going ahead when you know, the risks are not suggesting it's worth doing. We've done a couple of Zoom sessions with venues, and we've highlighted this to them. And what we have suggested to venues is this would be a very good use of furloughed staff. It's not income generating, it's not something they do in their usual course of their work. But what would be incredibly helpful is if you are a recommended supplier for the venue and the couple has booked on that behalf, that if the venue is thinking about postponing the couple, that they contact their recommended suppliers that are booked in to do that wedding, and they liaise with them over dates as well. Let's not leave all of this in the hands of couples, because that is what has led to so many quite stressful cancellations, you know, couples needing to leave suppliers behind that they really want to be working with. And we highlighted this to venues. It's not all about the venues. You know, it's photographers were almost as high a priority as the venue. These couples, when they've chosen their photographer, they're wanting to work with the photographer. The same goes right the way across a lot of suppliers. Those not on the list, please don't feel that it's not that you wouldn't have been wanted. It's that we're recognising that particularly some categories like florists can make it work. You know, if the couple move to a different date, you'll just move hell and high water to make sure that you can still do their dates somehow. But these were for the elements that if the wedding date is moved without consultation, there is a risk of these needing to be cancelled. And it was important for venues to know that it's not all about what they're doing. What we see online every time Boris Johnson opens his mouth with more bad news, is a rush of couples looking at this is the stats from the availability calendar. Orange is our norm from the previous year. Blue is last year, and you can see there's certain dates, certain announcements that people just went nuts, and they were just going, right, when do I change things to? And this is right the way across. This is venues and suppliers. It's not all categories that have the availability calendar. Again, some it's not as relevant to. You wouldn't book or not book just based on availability. If you are concerned as a supplier on using the availability calendar because you don't want to be offering peak dates to your postponed couples willingly, you would rather keep that one free, which is completely understandable for future bookings, or you would prefer to work with the venue to see if there's another date that might work. Our tip for you in using the availability calendar is use limited availability as the option. So you've got options of available, limited availability, provisionally booked, and so on. If it's marked as limited availability or available, you will appear on those late availability pages so people can find you. What really cheered us up is this entrances one, because when we dug deeper into that, this is a lot of couples that had planned overseas weddings, and they're now going, it's not going to happen. We're moving back here. Who's available? They've already decided on their date. They've already told all of their guests what the date is. The date suddenly becomes the most important factor for them in planning their wedding. So they're going to late availability. And it's been one of our big frustrations is showing businesses the benefit of being on those pages. And I know it's work and it needs to be done every month. How we work the late availability calendar is if you've updated your calendar in the last month, you will appear. If you haven't, we assume your calendar is out of date. So once a month, put it in the diary, just pop on there, update your availability. It takes a few minutes, and it's a page that's getting a huge amount of traffic at the moment, and is going to bring in some of those late bookings, more importantly. So these next slides, we have them for various different categories. We have put this together for some of the work being done within the task force. This is a project being led by Siobhan Craven-Robbins, who runs the National Association for Wedding Professionals as the part of the representation group. So this is the group that's making sure that the needs of all suppliers and all types of businesses are taken into consideration in any roadmap. And some of the work they're doing around that is around what is a reasonable calculation of a refund. So this is based on 8 weeks before the wedding. How much of the cost has already been incurred in delivering that wedding? Now, there are a few anomalies in all of these. I will just scroll through slowly and you'll see, no surprise, there are some things, hair and makeup, for example, almost everything is towards the second half of the wedding. Sorry, for some reason that seems to be reversed, which isn't helpful. Bridal wear, it's, there's a big cost. It's usually 50% of the cost is incurred at the point that they order. Some of them it's 100% of the cost at that point. This starts to inform what we feel would be a reasonable amount to be charging for in the situation where the postponement means that your services are cancelled. So these are the costs that seem to be reasonably incurred early on. So really helpful data for us to be able to present to the CMA. If the CMA are trying to say that, how do caterers incur costs that far on? Well, look, they clearly do, because every single one of the caterers had said that some costs would have been incurred. Sorry, we've got one who said the no cost, but the costs are very low. None of them are saying that 75 or 100%. This is exactly what you would expect to see going on. So again, with cakes, it's quite a lot of cake companies saying somewhere around 25, almost some of them as much as 50% of the cost has been incurred 8 weeks before the wedding. Planners, most of the cost has been incurred before the wedding. Again, no surprise. Celebrants, a lot of the work, you know, some being done quite early on. But when we look at that point, 8 weeks before the wedding, there's only one of the people that replied that said that there was, I think that's 5% of the work. So this sort of thing really helps to inform policies. Those policies aren't there yet, but they will be coming. Venue decor, marquees. I know we've got at least one marquee company with us. Obviously, marquee companies, really, really difficult, massive costs, but not an awful lot of it is incurred 8 weeks before the wedding, so quite hard to justify. Stationery, huge costs 8 weeks before the wedding. Generally, a lot of the work is done at that point. And florists, I'm guessing this, the couple that were in here, I'm guessing this must be silk flowers, something along those lines, for all of the cost to be incurred 8 weeks before the wedding. Again, entertainment, transport, very, very few costs before the wedding day, obviously. So when we come on to looking at those cancellations, a few different elements to be looking at when you're trying to work out your policy. And this is an overriding message. It's about you working out the policy that is going to be right for your business and right for your clients. You know, if one thing that has really come out of the last 12 months, it's businesses have really fine-tuned what they stand for and what they're about. So I don't think this is something that anyone can dictate to you. What is worth being aware of when you're thinking about that policy? Look at the reasons for cancelling. In most environments, and even last year, very often the reasons for cancelling, you would really come down on the side of the supply. You know, that the couple hadn't thought to consult with their photographer before changing date, for example. You know, I would be quite harsh on those couples. But we do have couples now who are cancelling the wedding for very good reason. They've moved on. They had to go ahead with a smaller wedding for whatever reason. In some cases, sadly, it's that a crucial member of the family is not now going to be there. You know, if you've lost your father, you probably wouldn't then be wanting to, you know, work with the cake company that he had particularly asked for, because, you know, they had made the kids' birthday cakes, or, you know, whatever else it might be. So there's going to be some really difficult sentimental reasons that some couples are needing to cancel now. There's also a lot of them have just chosen that they've waited for more than a year now. They're wanting to move forward with their lives, have children and so on. You're also going to be taking into consideration if the reason for cancelling is that the venue is needing to move them to a date and you're a recommended supplier for that venue, it might be that your choice is to keep that relationship going with the venue in the hope that they will recommend other people in the future, and you're better off just accepting you're going to lose that one. Online reputation, really, really important. You don't want to be forcing somebody to continue to be working with you if they have no need for your services anymore. We've heard this with quite a few live bands and so on, where couples have said, you know, this doesn't make any sense, and they've then taken to social media. Almost entirely, when couples are getting upset about something, they are taking to social media. If we pick up a review that's anything other than 5-star, we have now got a pause button on it. It pauses it for 7 days. It allows time for the couple to calm down. It allows time for us to let the business know. And so far it has led to some very good outcomes, because we can put the couple in touch with the business. Almost always it's a misunderstanding. It's you know, somebody was having a bad day, and it can usually be resolved. And so far, when I say resolved, it's been resolved in the favour of both sides. It's not been a situation where a couple has used it in order to sort of blackmail a business to get them to the table to agree to their terms. It has always been that it just needed some clearer communication. So that, again, is somewhere we can help. We cannot help, though, if they go onto social media and start saying things. Benefit of looking at cancelling as in some time and some occasions a better option, is that it does allow you to retain at least some cost from this wedding, but still be able to resell at full price. So particularly relevant for those couples that might be being a little bit tricky with you. You're struggling to agree a new date, or they're wanting unreasonable terms. It may be better to say, look, pay for what we've already incurred, and take away the designs we've done for your stationery, or take away the concepts that we came up with for the flowers. Pay for what we have already delivered, and you're free from the contract. That then means you are free to resell that date at full price. And bear in mind the fact your 2022 dates are going to be quite a lot higher than you were selling in 2019, so that could be beneficial. The other point to be looking at when you're trying to work out whether just to let this couple cancel or whether you try to hold on to them is the impact on your stress levels and your anxiety levels. COVID is really, really taking a toll on that, and I think a lot of suppliers are really feeling sort of under the cosh, trying to do the right thing, feeling emotionally blackmailed. The CMA certainly don't help with that, and because there's only a few cases that have been tested in court, but it is starting to happen. Small claims court are starting to hear some of the smaller supplier claims. It's quite difficult to have any sort of history you can go back on to be able to say, I'm confident we're going to win this one. If you are managing cancellations, and I think managing is the key word, this is something to have a strategy for your business. You probably wouldn't have before COVID, thank goodness. And it's incredibly sad that we're talking about needing to have a strategy around this. Step one, change the dialogue from refund to full cost, and do that as early as you possibly can. Obviously, only if it's reasonable to do so. Be transparent with your reasonable expenses, and if you can do that up front, and that can be as subtle as on your website explaining the process from when you take the booking right through to the wedding day. This is what we do. So as a celebrant, straight after you've booked, I want to be able to capture that excitement. So I will start writing how I see the ceremony running. That sort of documentation on your website makes it really clear that some of the work is being delivered at that point. A photographer saying that straight after the booking is made, I always contact the venue, arrange a site visit at that point, so that I can let the couple know at a very early stage, while they can still cancel if there's some reason that we can't go ahead. There isn't the oak tree that they pictured for the crucial shot they needed, whatever it might be. So if you can set out what that looks like, because what the CMA did not understand and what MPs had not understood is how much of the wedding is delivered in those 10 to 20 months before the wedding day. And if they didn't understand, it's quite likely that couples didn't understand. And if couples didn't understand, then you can really see why they can't understand why they wouldn't get a full refund. It's not like booking an airline ticket where you've booked it online, no work is done until you turn up at the airport. So be transparent with reasonable expenses. Establishing when the wedding is frustrated. Remember, this works both ways. If the wedding is frustrated for you, you can argue with the couple that it is not financially viable for you to go ahead under these circumstances. I think in that situation, the expectation would be that any refund would be more than if it is the couple asking for the cancellation under normal terms and conditions, and whether it's a frustrated contract. So just for those that haven't come across this one, there is a difference in law. It is being challenged, but basically difference in law between a frustrated contract where one or both parties cannot go ahead with it, and it's impossible for that contract to happen, where basically everything defaults back to costs only, as opposed to a cancellation that happens under terms and conditions, which is then under your normal terms and conditions. So in normal times, if a couple, so I would argue a couple with a wedding in August that should be able to go ahead as normal as far as anyone is concerned from current government guidance, should be able to go ahead as normal. If they choose to cancel, you would say, right, our normal terms and conditions say X, Y, Z. Now, they have to be fair and reasonable. It's the difference between the consumer law and business law. So the reason why when you're signing a business lease, for example, you take it to a solicitor is because business to business transactions are legally binding. If you've agreed to it, you've agreed to it, however unreasonable it might be. Consumers are protected from that. So your terms have to be fair and reasonable. And if, as a photographer, for example, where obviously some of the costs are incurred on the day, at the moment, while weddings can't go ahead, there is very little value to that on the day element. You can't resell it to anyone else. So it is quite difficult to argue that the couple should pay 100%. So that is just worth bearing in mind. Discussing a reasonable time frame for refunds, the CMA allowed for this in their April guidance. They said because of the disruption caused by COVID, it's reasonable to expect that it will take a little bit of time for businesses to issue refunds. Now, that was at the point at which a lot of businesses had furloughed all of their account staff. And so there was nobody there and available logistically to pay. I think I would argue now that if you can evidence that it would put your business in at financial risk and that 85% of your couples could be jeopardized for the 15% that may be cancelling, that it is good reason for you to hold off paying refunds until weddings restart. Now, this would be an argument that you would need to potentially be able to defend in court, but I think it's something we would like the CMA to clarify because it would help a lot of businesses. The last thing everyone needs when we've had 6 seasons of closed season now, because obviously COVID hit just as we were going into the wedding season. The last thing we need is people taking money out of your bank accounts right now. And then the final one, for those that haven't been on the receiving end of this, in a situation where you deem a contract frustrated, the couple has insurance, and so you merrily and perhaps quite reasonably say, right, they've got insurance, so I'll charge them what I was going to charge them for the wedding. The insurance company, if they do pay that couple out on that insurance claim, may well come after you for the money. If that does happen, explain to them what your reasonable costs are and how you calculated them, but be very, very cautious. If you are thinking of charging 100%, be very, very cautious on that one. So moving on from the grim topic of cancellations, and hopefully that's going to be that last 15 minutes or so is going to be the biggest waste of your time, because it's not going to be something that any of you are needing to face or deal with. Preparing for 2021 and beyond. These stats were taken from quite a large study right the way across the UK, but it was taken just before Christmas. And at that point, we weren't facing a national lockdown and the second strain of COVID coming in. We are expecting probably these numbers to swap. I think even now, I think I would probably be more comfortable saying that would be my prediction. A lot more will be moving to 2022. Those that had first weddings in 2021 and are comfortable moving may well wait if they're not in a hurry to have families. So bear in mind the fact there are a lot of weddings coming. It will also mean there will be a lot of opportunists coming into the wedding industry. There will be a lot of new threats from the point of view of new businesses springing up, and then the danger is obviously this is very, very short-lived. The chances are that we will go through the backlog quite quickly. I think the majority of them we're expecting to go through by the end of 2022, and although we're going to need a lot of businesses to service all these weddings for the next 2 years, that isn't going to be ongoing. So making sure that you really stand out and you've got those unique selling points and you don't get into a sort of, a discount price to the bottom is going to be quite important in your strategy. So other things that we can be doing to support the industry. Hopefully everyone is now aware of the UK Weddings Task Force. This was eventually formed as a result of last year. There were lots of us working individually on solutions for our own clients, and those groups were forming into other groups. So we worked alone for a while. We worked as part of the original What About Weddings group, which has now turned into more of a political campaign group, and then moved across to support the work of the UK Weddings Task Force, as that was just starting to set up. Inevitably, the task force has a slightly sort of venues first approach, and the reason behind that is there is the very, very strong feeling that it is a particular type of venue that really, really props up the wedding economy, and if those venues go, they take a lot of suppliers with them, and they take a lot of couples with them. There's a lot of prepayments tied up. I mean, many, many millions tied up in these venues. So we need to make sure that that the venues can survive, and that they take everyone with them. But it's also really important that everything that we do through the task force acknowledges that 55% of the wedding economy, and far higher percentage of that of the proportion of businesses within the wedding economy are not venues or caterers. That's made up of the smaller businesses, and we are now aware, those of you that filled in the survey for the UK Weddings Task Force over Christmas, what came out of that is 75% of businesses across the UK would be able to get through to April without significant financial hardship, with a grant of less than £10,000. Now that's really, really important to be able to get that across to government, that it wouldn't take a lot for a lot of businesses. But there are a lot of businesses with much, much, much higher running costs, and that would be a drop in the ocean. They wouldn't notice that coming in and going straight out again. So it needs different solutions, and this is what the task force is working on. So different solutions that will work for venues and suppliers. There will be schemes probably aligned with UK hospitality. We're pushing for 5% VAT, but we're pushing for that 5% VAT to be right the way across the board, so all suppliers being able to offer that. And that's the sort of thing that can make a difference for the bigger businesses, but it all helps flow down right the way across. To keep up to date with what's going on within the task force, you'll notice there's been very little on social media until last night. There was the first Instagram post went out last night, and then followed by almost 1,000 followers overnight. It will only be the facts that go on there. So facts will be on the official website, which is ukweddings.org, on the official Instagram, and there's social media right the way across, I think, all of the platforms now. There is one official spokesperson, which is Sarah Hayward. So when you see her speaking on the news, speaking on any forum, she is the one that has the sheet of this is what is to be released right now in front of her. Anyone else is able, that's involved in the task force, is able to share the information. We're trying to make sure as much of the information, if it doesn't compromise wedding businesses, we are putting it out there. But the difficulty is that as soon as we put it out there, it is available for brides as well as businesses. Part of the reason I was keen to have this Zoom as a closed Zoom today. But it's really important that those working within the task force don't have privileged information, and that's part of the area that I have got myself quite involved in, is that communication and making sure that if the task force knows something, that all businesses should know it. So you will see different approaches to the messages going out there depending on the platform. Everyone knows that our approach has been very much about getting consumer confidence up. So our approach, and we get, you know, from time to time we get stick on our Facebook lives with people saying this is far too positive. It is positive for very, very good reasons. So, and that is because what's really important is we have those couples there in the pipeline once weddings can take place. So the other sort of work that we've been looking at is looking at what's going to be important to couples to make sure those bigger weddings can happen with confidence. We were delighted that what was very high up on this was COVID safety guidance, because thanks to so many businesses over many years, we have been badgered to have some sort of industry standard. We don't at the moment have an industry standard, so it's something that we at Guides for Brides have been working on. And this really reinforced the importance that for couples to be confident going back into wedding venues, they want to know that those wedding venues are following all of the regulations. This will be launching in the next week or so. It is a Guides for Brides project. You will notice when it goes out there, it will not be branded at all as Guides for Brides, and it is because we have been working with Hitched, Bridebook, Confetti, and National Association of Wedding Professionals, and as well as the devolved nations to work on this. So the idea of this is that businesses will be able to sign up to an industry standard. Ethical trading is going to be changing to be code of conduct, and I know a lot of people will really, really support this. This will include things like copyright and plagiarism, making sure businesses, you know, understand how to work properly and ethically. And one of the things this will do is it will squeeze out the opportunist companies from coming in. Anyone checking this list will be able to see you know, that you are properly out there, that you are, if you're members of associations, if you're listed on any of the platforms, it will all show on here, and local authorities will be able to check businesses out on here as well. There will be a cost to it. Sadly, we would love there not to be, but you know, it is something that we've taken on as something that is just the right thing to do by the industry. So we have taken on all of the risk, or in fact, we've taken on a good old bounce back loan to take on all of the risk. But hopefully it is something that suppliers will be able to support and benefit from. Other areas we've been looking at that's worth having at the back of your mind for pre-planning. We asked couples which elements could take place outside or in a marquee at your current venue. Obviously, the couples don't know about things like sound limitation, but this is a good one for the you know, the DJs and the bands to be aware of. Is couples seem to think that a lot of venues could potentially have the music and dancing going on outside. Obviously, drinks receptions, as florists, you might want to start thinking about how you are working with outdoor spaces a little bit more. I think this is one of the things we'll be looking at, and certainly is in the proposals going forward to government, is that perhaps for those venues with outdoor spaces, there can be perhaps less restrictions in place. The other ideas we were interested in, this was after conversations with health and safety specialists, on the dilemma of all of those very many weddings that take place in marquees and so on. Those of you that work in marquee weddings will probably have heard the dialogue so far has not included anything other than COVID-safe weddings. We're trying to encourage those couples that have marquee weddings at home to decamp the entire thing to the grounds of a venue. So take the same caterer, marquee company, all of their suppliers with them, but within the grounds of the marquee companies, so that it can be properly risk assessed. But this could be an alternative solution. So it will be interesting to see if this is something that that is taken forward. Otherwise, I can see marquee weddings are going to be a bit of a challenge. So our best guess for 2021, and as I say, I'll just add that caveat in, this is from the information that we are looking at. We are not expecting much before the Easter weekend. Boris Johnson himself had spoken about Easter weekend in some of his addresses. He has also said the 5th of April. So if you're thinking, is it the beginning or the end of Easter weekend? We're also very aware that some of the politicians that are really getting behind the wedding industry are sort of very sort of C of E oriented, and probably wouldn't be that supportive of weddings starting during Lent. So it makes sense. We need to choose a date there or thereabouts. So the date that is being championed is the one that Boris Johnson had suggested, which is from Easter weekend onwards. So realistically, the end of that weekend. That doesn't mean that weddings before Easter are frustrated. All we're saying is that our focus as a task force, we need to have something to focus on, is that if we are looking at weddings from that point, what do we need to look at? So, you know, taking into consideration, for example, the inclement weather that's more likely to be happening in April than in May. It is different across the different nations. The firebreak in Wales didn't go as well as they had expected, so they're having a few problems now, and they have been warned to expect the restrictions to be going on for much longer, potentially right into the summer months. They have also been warned in Wales, and I think logically this would certainly make sense to prepare for autumn and winter restrictions. We don't know whether that's going to be the case, but if they're warning them in Wales that that's likely to happen, and we know that for winter weddings we come inside more, and the flu rate is up, therefore the COVID rate is likely to be up, it does sort of make sense, so be aware of that. Numbers, the industry is pushing for the idea of it being a minimum viable number of 50, that we're not wanting to accept anything under 50 for opening up. But that would run in line with restricted by capacity. So if you are a venue for 200, the proposal is that you should be able to open up with whatever numbers are allowed within that under social distancing. So that capacity is a socially distant capacity. It's not huge numbers, just to warn you. But as I say, this is the proposal. It is not something that government have agreed to. Long-term adjustments, we are seeing the size of weddings slightly shrinking. If anyone hasn't seen our last week's newsletter, had an invitation to the Bride Luck Symposium, and that's one of the topics. Certainly, it's the one that I will be looking at. Is, you know, does this mean an increase in destination couples from other countries choosing the UK, where, you know, our cost per head for these really nice, you know, luxury weddings is comparatively high, but if people are moving to smaller wedding sizes, is this an opportunity? So it's a 2-day symposium. We've got it's free access, so we can send you the link again if needed for that. But that's the sort of adjustments that they'll be looking at in that, and I think it's worth just have at the back of your mind. Live streaming, I know if Sam and Steve are on here, I know they've been looking a lot at live streaming. It's a project we've been working on as well. There will be a lot of that sort of thing happening, so just to keep that in the back of your mind. We touched on non-COVID safe venues. We don't know what's going to happen with those. It's too early to say, and it's probably going to depend on whether we can get a sort of champion from the marquee industry and from catering companies that depend on these weddings at home to get really involved in the task force and get those on the agenda for opening up. At the moment, because it's venues leading it, inevitably it's tending to be the sort of venue type weddings we're looking at. And the last thing to be looking at for 2021 and beyond, there will be more international opportunities. So these are those couples that had planned destination weddings now coming back here, and also couples from other countries looking at the UK as possible wedding destinations. As I said, if they're shrinking down the numbers, it actually opens up a lot of our venues. On the flip side, for those of you that work with the very large, a lot of the faith ceremonies, the multicultural weddings, the Asian weddings, where there isn't a very, very strong tie to the UK, we know a lot of wedding planners are moving to Dubai and countries where it's hot year-round, and they've kept their infection rates low as a result. So if you are working within that environment, have that at the back of your mind. And finally, when you are having a bad day, think 2%. So if you are having a run-in with a couple, or you're not sure whether you're getting it right, you're doing the wrong thing. This was the question asked of very specifically about venues. This was not directed at suppliers because, you know, we needed to just pick one element to look at. But on the whole, couples, the only time we're hearing on social media from couples is when they've had a problem. We're not hearing about all of the fantastic service that they're getting from all of the businesses and the suppliers like you that they're working with. When we invite it, my goodness, they flood the feeds with it. So, you know, when you need to see that, just go back, read your reviews. Remember, when you're having that bad day, the chances are you will be sitting in that 98%, and it is the couple that's being unreasonable. We'll keep doing what we're doing. You keep doing what you're doing. You're doing brilliantly. We're almost at the end. So it's just this final little challenge to get over, and hopefully we'll be there. Thanks ever so much, Lou, for joining us today.